All the second stage tanks now pressurized. Astronauts report it feels good. T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal. 12, 11, 10, 9. Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Like a furry torpedo to the jugular. This is Honey Badger Radio. Radio with bite.
How many feminists does it take to screw in a light bulb?
Oh my God. Misogyny. Rape culture. Hand over your woman card immediately.
HBR Talk with Hannah Wallen. The term scold originated as the name for a device used mostly on women, mostly for being loud, obnoxious, and objectionable. It was a mask in the form of an iron cage around the head, essentially a muzzle, placed there to humiliate and intimidate the wearer into more demure comportment. In other words, it was a public shaming tool used to control the demeanor of those subject to its use. Today, it most commonly refers to a verbal correction that involves vehement castigation, a behavior which might have gotten a woman scolded long ago, should she have created a public disturbance in the process. Now, feminists are trying to use it on women who dare to publicly, openly reject their ideology. Of course, they don't use a muzzle made of iron. They use hateful, shaming language and other forms of social pressure, as was done when Beyoncé told British Vogue she didn't consider herself to be a feminist. Article after article followed, each giving pretty much the same warning. Oh, you say you don't need feminism. Is that right? Well, that's a nice career you've got there, honey. Isn't it kind of based on your social currency? What a shame it would be if that currency vanished and took your career with it because you failed to show loyalty to the right people. Wouldn't that just be so sad?
We'll get you, my pretty, and your little job, too!
And after a short while of quietly enduring veiled threats from the feminist media, Beyoncé mysteriously, surprisingly, without any apparent reason for her change of heart, came out loudly and proudly, almost desperately in fact, as a feminist. She's not the only one. There have been several women in entertainment whose decision to adopt the feminist label followed the same kind of exchange. The message, at least to those women, is clear. You are the sisterhood's property. They own every measure of your social currency, and you'd better not contradict their attempts to use it, or they might have to show you who is boss. But it's not just famous women who are subject to what Alison has correctly labeled the pimp hand of feminism. The rest of us have had our share of encounters with it, and they're not quiet about doing that either. Every woman who advocates for legislative and social reform that conflicts with feminist objectives has heard it.
Oh, you oppose feminism. Don't vote then. In fact, don't even exercise your freedom of speech. We got you those rights, and you owe us.
We've had the feminist social media mob directed at us, been excommunicated from our own communities, accused of everything from internalized misogyny to rape apology, even had feminists hit us with gender traitor, the gender politics version of race traitor, a particularly bigoted term for people who marry outside their ethnic group. Most of us have at one time or another been false reported on social media, and many of us have been penalized or even deplatformed on various sites as a result. Some of us have had our jobs threatened and our private information published, the implied threat being that our private lives could possibly be invaded by people who don't like our stated perspectives. We're told that we must like being beaten and raped, that our opinions are not our own but those of our male family members who must have battered us into submission. We're diagnosed with Stockholm Syndrome, as if our beloved male family and friends are an enemy force that has kidnapped us and psychologically abused us into submission. For having the screaming audacity to live peacefully in a co-ed society, we're convicted of the crime of internalized misogyny. But remember, guys, feminism is not about hating men. They just hate women who don't hate men. That's totally not the same thing. And of course, we're all told, believe women. You know, just not those women. Not those pesky non-feminist types. They're womaning wrong, you see, so their womanhood does not count. During the 2016 election cycle, this escalated. Madeleine Albright and Gloria Steinem tried to shame women into voting for Hillary Clinton out of loyalty to the sisterhood. Once again, their language was veiled. Their "you owe us" sermon?
There's a special place in hell for women who don't help other women.
When the message fell flat, they couldn't imagine that it was because they were wrong. Nah, it couldn't be that. It couldn't be that feminism's mafia tactics had worn thin, or at least the public's patience with them had. It was yet again that dissenting women's husbands and other male relatives were coercing them into going against their own interests. Because women's interests, of course, are contrary to those of men. And they are feminist territory and feminist territory only, right? And feminism stops being about choice the moment a woman fails to choose a feminist-approved path. Did you non-feminist women forget who owns your social position? Getting all uppity and independent, are you? Been hanging out with those evil men again? Come on, do you need to be reminded about the bicycle and the fish? Don't you make Mama Albright smack a bit.
Watch yourself!
And Donald Trump was elected to the office of president, and the sisterhood lost their minds. They still don't get it. During the Kavanaugh debacle, they outright claimed ownership of the entire country, still in the name of all women, whether we consented to being spoken for or not. Women were owed a particular result, they declared. The accuser must be believed, and the accused must be effectively excommunicated from all of society. Failure to do so, we were told, would be an attack on all women everywhere, and a message to those of us who have been victims of violent sex crimes that our experiences don't matter, whether we took it that way or not. Believe women, they literally shrieked at our nation's lawmakers. But that battle cry didn't apply to any of the women who spoke out in support of due process standards, especially not that pesky presumption of innocence. We didn't matter to feminists because, again, we're not womaning right. Our womanhood doesn't count. Another thing that didn't matter to those calumniating harridans was whether anything they said about us was true. No, the screeching harpies of the Pussy Hat Brigade demand that the subjects of their diatribe submit to being exploited as political fodder. They will not take no for an answer, even when no comes from more of the female population than are willing to give them the yes they expect. And even when it comes from women in the very positions of authority feminists have demanded be given to women on the basis of their sex. Because, remember, not those women. Those women are womaning wrong. There's a name for women like that, isn't there? Gender traitor. That ugly, bigoted, hate-mongering term feminists try to use to keep non-feminist women in line, once only heard from radfems, has now been passed around the television establishment media like Mary Jane at a rock festival, with few speaking out against its use even if they didn't choose to participate. It has been published, in all seriousness, in a New York Times article targeting Senator Susan Collins of Maine for having the audacity to reject the authority of her feminist overlords. As long as they sit back and silently condone this, so-called nice feminists can no longer even pretend to claim that the vicious, malicious mob tactics of their movement's establishment do not represent their mainstream. This, ladies, is your feminism. Not because you support it, but because this ugliness is the very public, very intrusive, totally unchallenged face of your movement. This is the feminism everybody sees. And these are not outliers getting labeled feminist by people who oppose the so-called true meaning of feminism. These aren't women for whom the label feminist was never a thing until they said something nasty in public. These messages of arrogance and tyranny are coming from your media personalities, your politicians, the organizers of your movement's most heavily attended public protests, and the icons of your second and third wave. This is the feminism with which everyone is confronted on a daily basis, the feminism that is all up in everybody's business. If you don't like that, don't bother telling those of us who have been targeted by it. We can all agree that they are complete and utter assholes. But they're your assholes, and their shit is your shit. If you don't want to be covered in it, you'd better be ready to own it. You'd better step up and clean house. Until you do, you have no business expecting us to ignore that mess. And you have no business calling upon other women who have rejected that mess, demanding our loyalty to your cause. I have said this before, and I will say it again. I will never stop saying it, regardless of the feminist response. To the feminist aristocracy, academia, and media, and the useful idiots who support them, non-feminist, anti-feminist, and men's rights activist women aren't as easy to intimidate and control as your average feminist drone. Those of us who speak out against you are not afraid of being kicked out of the sisterhood. We don't give a rat's hairy ass about your sisterhood, and you're not going to shut us up by cracking the whip of exclusion. We are not obligated to go along with you in your gendering of the human rights dialogue to exclude men from consideration and exempt women from accountability. Your victim narrative is not our responsibility to maintain. Don't think for a moment you can intimidate us or shame us into compliance. You're not going to change our opinions by calling us names or threatening our social standing. We are not here for a popularity contest. We're here to draw attention to issues that people like you want to ignore. You're not going to commandeer our loyalty through coercion, guilt-tripping, or Kafka-trapping. None of us were born yesterday, even if most of you were, and we are not susceptible to such tactics. You're not going to get anywhere accusing us of a betrayal when we don't toe the feminist line. We are not your silent stable of proxy victims to be whored out for political points, and we will not be muzzled by the iron mask of your derision. Feminism does not own women. You are not entitled to our loyalty. We do not owe you anything for your history of political agitation. We're not your territory. We're not your subjects. We're not your ballast or your burden. We're not your sisters. Most of all, regardless of the volume of your marching orders, we are not your personal army. This is not going to change. Deal with it. Hello, and welcome to Technical Difficulties with the Badgers. HBR Talk 55. Toe that line. Hell no. And by golly, they're not going to shut us down. I actually am not sure exactly what the deal was, other than the fact that all of a sudden my computer took on a mind of its own and started asking itself questions and answering itself, and then it shut down.
It's a feminist!
So, yeah, and I don't have time to do a virus search during the show, so I'll do one after the show. But fair warning to my fellow Badgers, I'm going to close the window that has this SciTube in it right now, so you're going to hear the SciTube take off again. And
right,
we are in Badger Talk. And of course, everything that I had set up prior to the show, gone. So you can't see the chat until I give the chat permission to show on the show and all of that fun stuff. But in the meantime, here we are with my co-hosts, she who must be obeyed, Karen Straughan, and that
That's
adorable
me.
specter of death, Prim Reaper, to squeal on the feminist mafia for their anti-independence tactics. But before we get into all that, you guys still gotta listen to a show. You know the drill. If you're on YouTube and it starts experiencing platform malfunction syndrome, and it won't let you listen, or if the feminist mafia has broken one of our legs, or my computer, well, we're also on Twitch and Facebook, which also won't work if my computer goes down. But then we restart, because you can't keep a good badger down. If you want to catch our show in its audio format, or if you want to be sure you'll always be able to catch our live streams, even though YouTube hates us and always has at least one of our channels in the gulag, remember to go to badgerfeed.com and register to receive notifications. Because with all of those non-shadow bans, you need notifications from badgerfeed.com to tell you what we're doing and when. And if you're still listening to our live streams on the main Honey Badger Radio channel, please, that's old news. For live streams, the Badger Live Streams channel is where it's at. You can hear us on both channels, but once the live stream has ended, it'll only be on Badger Live Streams. And in reference to the aforementioned gulag, you can't super chat us on the Honey Badger Radio channel right now. So if you plan to send us things to read on air during the show, like Field of Bears $2 super chat that we got during the opening monologue, and he said, Team America Film Actors Guild speech. If you want to be able to do that, you gotta be on the Honey Badger live streams channel. So if you're on the HBR channel, look in low bar. There's a link to the stream on the live streams channel. And last but not least, don't forget to like and share this and other Honey Badger live streams to be seen by other people. Think of it as your chance to thumb your nose at the establishment. And of course, speaking of the establishment, speaking of thumbing our noses at the establishment, no less, what do you guys think of seeing and hearing the term gender traitor getting batted around by the establishment media?
I am pretty over that one. I'm not gonna lie. Just the thought that anybody can be a traitor to one's gender, like we're all some sort of hive mind who has to think the same way in order to, I don't know, have the privilege of having our genitals, I guess. It's pretty ridiculous if you think about it, and I don't know why it suddenly became acceptable to use terms like that. It's pretty ridiculous.
Well, I think I completely agree. It's totally unacceptable to use such terms. The proper term for women like us is labia traitors.
Oh, there you
there we go.
Yeah,
I've actually heard that one too. That one's. I don't know. I don't think it's as commonly used. That one's still.
I think it was Mike Rue who coined it.
Yeah, so. Yeah. Although I've actually seen it batted around by radfems too. So.
Ew.
Yeah, but it usually seems to refer to trans men, not us. That actually women who biological women who identify as men.
We're not trans men. We're honorary men.
Yes.
Honorary men. We are men's puppets, and men's pawns, and their tools, and all of that. That's what we are.
Yeah.
So
we're just barefoot and pregnant in the kitchen, right?
Well, I'm barefoot right now, and I was just in the kitchen, but then I had to turn off the smoke detector. So.
Well, I mean, I'm barefoot and pregnant, but not currently in the kitchen, though. So I guess I just suck at my job.
You're doing it wrong. You're totally doing it wrong.
Oh, we suck at this job.
We do. Yeah. We do. You know, honestly, I suck so much at this job that I can't get annoyed at gender traitor anymore. The only thing that annoys me about the use of it in that New York Times article was that she essentially said, and yes, this is a nod to the most unrealistic piece of future fiction that has ever been written, ever. And that's where women are right now.
Yeah.
The Handmaid's Tale, right? Like this is, it will never happen. This is never something a society is ever going to do to their own women, right? You can talk about ISIS and sex slavery, the Yazidi women, and all of those things, right? You know, those situations are when you have women of another tribe, right, that get kidnapped or get abducted or get taken by an enemy tribe, right? Those are the things that happen and have happened through history. But there is no society that set itself up to treat its own women that way, as just nothing but forced breeders or sex slaves or whatever, right? It's just like no man is going to agree to live in a society where his mother or his daughters or his sister are going to be treated like that. So,
well, you know, and it's kind of bothersome at its core to think that these shrieking harridans would ever think to say that they are more our allies than the men that we have in our lives that we care about, that we're like, you know, there are some things that are maybe not so great for men right now and they deserve to be addressed. And they're like, oh, you are a gender traitor. We are your allies, not them. And it's like, oh, okay. Yeah, I don't think so, actually.
Yeah, well, honestly, as well, I do want to make a note of the fact that, when people talk about how The Handmaid's Tale is such a horrific, horrible, apocalyptic dystopia type thing, right? In the way the women are treated, right? This is essentially, these are the same people who say, when you say, well, women have never been drafted into war, and they say, well, yeah, but women are obligated to give birth to the next generation of soldiers. No, they're not, right? Because if they were, that you would be living in The Handmaid's Tale, and that's never happened, right? Men get drafted into war. Women do not get drafted by the government into childbirth. They don't. There's no government in the world. There's no government in the world that says, okay, so we got all these names. We're going to pull them out of a hat. Okay, you, and you go fuck these guys and give birth a bunch of times.
The only government that has
we don't have that, and we've never had that.
The only government that has ever asked women or demanded women to have, babies for the government was Nazi Germany. And that was destroyed in war. And that wasn't all women. That was women that were volunteers, first of all. Yeah. And it was prestigious, right? And second of all, they had to have certain characteristics.
It wasn't
mandatory. But
it wasn't mandatory. It was not a draft. It was a recruitment exercise.
That's the closest we've ever gotten to a society where they recruited specific women to have babies. We've never had a situation where somebody's come along and forced any group of women. Well, we've never had a situation where the government's come along and forced any group of women to have babies. Slave women were forced to have babies. And that was not a government thing. That was their owners, which is their government. But in any case, this is one of the things that really struck me when I've gone through and looked at the variety of discussions in the news about non-feminist and anti-feminist women who have supported Trump, women who have supported Kavanaugh, women who simply supported due process and said if Kavanaugh did something wrong, then he should be accountable for it, but we have to find that out first. Even just doing that, even just supporting due process, all of a sudden you are a hate monger. All of a sudden you hate women. And the bottom line, the underlying thought process, the underlying concept for all of this is, if you don't hate men, you hate women. If you don't want men to be second-class citizens and women to be privileged over them, you hate women. That is the underlying premise of feminism's attitudes toward anti-feminist women.
Well, what I found interesting was, I was on the radio. It was at 4:30 this morning, my time, 6:30, morning drive time radio with, oh God, I forget who it was. It was so freaking early. But he asked me about the Orrin Hatch incident with the elevator and the women confronting him. Why won't you talk to us? Why won't you talk to us about our experiences of sexual assault? Blah, 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 blah. And he told them to grow up. And then they started yelling, how dare you talk to a woman that way? And he made the comment, and this is what I'm seeing more and more from conservative men lately, is Orrin Hatch, not Orrin Hatch, about the Orrin Hatch incident, the host of this radio show, Michael something or other, he said, what struck me is that, there were conservative women telling women that, that you're giving up, you feminists are giving up your superiority in exchange for equality. And I said, well, here we have an example of that, right? Because these women are clinging to that ancient superiority, right? That ancient privilege that you do not talk, as a man, you do not talk to a woman this way, right? So they're clinging to that, and they're trying to play that card, and they're using it as a bullying tactic. And Orrin Hatch did exactly what he should have done. He flicked his fingers at them, and then his security people said, if you keep holding the elevator door open, you're going to get arrested. And but you can't have it both ways, ladies. You can't demand equality and then also demand to be put on the pedestal. And that's really what a lot of these women are doing. And I mean, the ones who attacked Jeff Flake in the elevator, who accosted him and started screaming at him, they were using female victimhood that was weaponized, and they were using it as a bludgeon and a bullying tactic. And they might not be bullies in general, just in their general daily activities, but they were certainly engaging in bullying then. And it's amazing how effective that tactic is. You're saying that my sexual assault doesn't matter. No, he's not. He's not. Because unless you were sexually assaulted by Judge Kavanaugh, he's not.
That's just it. The collective is threatened. And this is the problem with feminism. Women have to be, for their ends to be met, women have to be a collective. If we're not a collective, we're not useful to them. So if some of us disagree, if some of us are pro due process, if some of us don't think that one man's sexual assault is all men's sexual assault, and one woman's victimhood is all women's victimhood, and one woman's experience is all women's experiences, then we are a threat to the feminist political structure, and most of all to feminist political power.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of like whether we're superior or whether we're all victims that need protecting from the evil men. Either way, you can't be equal and at the same time have these kind of special qualifications. It just doesn't work that way. And I'm glad that you brought up both, because I see people doing it either way. Either that all women are fantastic and all women or all men are evil, or all women are victims of the patriarchy and therefore we must protect them. It's like, no, it just does not follow. You cannot trot out the standard, oh, feminism just means the dictionary definition of equality, and then say things like that. It just does not work. And they try to do it so often. And it's just like, how do more people not see the contradiction here? This should be obvious to everybody who looks at it for more than 2 seconds.
And I think the idea of women as a collective is sort of ingrained in our society, and that's probably part of the reason there's such a blindness to it.
Well, it's because gynocentrism places women in one big blob at the center of things, and men are, around the perimeter. And so, I mean, I'm going to refer people to Dr. Randomer Cam's video on how gynocentrism and patriarchy are not incompatible concepts. They are actually the same thing. But essentially, what you're looking at is a system that places women together and kind of wants to lump them together. And it's not a system, it's not a sociological system, it's a biological system, right? Because in terms of how, like, the reproductive differentials, let's look at that, right? Just strictly reproductive differentials and outcomes. Women are more similar to each other than different, and men are more different to each other than similar. At least in terms of the potentials. So the difference between a woman who's successful and one who is not in the reproductive sense is a woman who has 6 kids instead of 3, let's say, at least in the past, right? Whereas a man who is, very, very successful versus a man who is not, is a man who had 100 kids and the other guy had none. So, I mean, the payoffs are bigger for men, and so the differentiation and I think the urge to the impulse to separate yourself from other men, to do the one good man thing, to do I am the king of all of yous guys, and you are all, sort of cut out of the game. It's very, very much different for men than it is for women. And so, like, the idea that there's been a collective, that we've ever seen men as a collective, is ridiculous. And the idea that we see women as a collective is pretty much just how we've always done things.
You know, I'm gonna get into the super chats because we've already got 3 more. But I think you hit it. I think you hit the nail on the head there. And I also think, well, we'll just get into the super chats, and then I'll go into the next thing. We have, let's see, I read the Field of Bears one. We have Master Rogue gave us US $2, and let's see if I can do this right. Says Prim. I got instructions. I have to follow the instructions there. And then hug, heart, and I can't tell what that is because it's tiny on my screen. Face. Is that a smiley face? Okay.
Yeah.
Then Albert Nada gave us $5 Canadian and said, Karen, it's your favorite pest. Did you watch the vid? Did you send it to Carter?
Not yet.
How's your dog?
Not yet. I didn't. And my dogs are horrible as usual, but they're being quiet for now. Well, I mean, you might have heard one of them gnawing on a bone earlier. I gave her a bone.
At least it was a bone instead of like a tin can or something this time.
Or your couch.
Yeah, well, I gave her a piece of cow leg that was like full to both ends with marrow. So, she's busy. So that's good.
There you go.
She's horrible.
Then we have Frenchinator 2 gave us US $5 and said, government abuses indigenous people. Do you care? In quotes. A guy is saying this on Facebook. He opposes CERC, but he really annoys me. With me or against. So well, I'm not quite sure. That's kind of all mixed up.
The nice thing is that you can like agree with some people on some things and disagree with them on other things, and we don't all have to be mind clones of each other. Kind of like what feminism wants of us.
How many people just do not care about the fact that government abuses people? I mean, raise your hands if you don't give a shit and you're not trying to do anything about it. Because isn't that kind of why we're all here? In a way.
Well, you know,
this activity.
I think one of like, okay, so I'm from Canada, right? You know, so and I don't know where Frenchinator 2 is from, but our federal government, we have something called the Indian Act, which governs the federal government's relationship with natives, with indigenous peoples, I guess they're called now, not even Aboriginal people. First Nations, Aboriginal people, indigenous people, whatever the politically correct term is today. But massive sections of it, this piece of federal legislation were copied and pasted from South Africa's apartheid legislation.
Oh, that's great.
No, wait, no, it wasn't. No, wait. Backwards. I got it backwards. Pieces of South Africa's apartheid legislation was copied and pasted from our Indian Act.
Oh, that's even worse. Somehow.
Yeah. So I mean, like we do have problems, and the government is. I mean, but a lot of what I would consider to be government abuse of Indigenous people in Canada is stuff that Indigenous people are actually demanding more of. So they're demanding more money, more welfare, more handouts, more special treatment, more not being considered full Canadian citizens in terms of taxes and the law. So essentially, it's sort of we have a system in Canada, at least, of separate but equal, and of it really is First Nations. They are considered to be separate, self-governing nations within our larger federation, and it's just not workable. So, and it leads to a lot of problems, mostly for the First Nations people because they're a minority.
The very people is supposed to be helping.
Yeah, it just doesn't. It just doesn't.
Well, so. My dad made a point. We were talking about. Well, we talk politics a lot at my parents' house. I grew up talking politics. I mean, this is pretty much like breathing for me. In fact, sometimes I talk politics better than I breathe, probably because I still live in Ohio. But in any case, the point that he made that I think was a really salient point, and this is something he's been pointing out in various ways at various times whenever we talk politics. But He actually wrote it down, and I actually photographed it so that I would have it, and I've got it on my phone right now. I'm looking at it. All tyranny has a common belief it springs from, that these people are not able to take care of themselves, and so it is our burden to take care of them, decide what is good for them and not good for them, and provide for them. And that ends up being the basis for the control the government exercises over, quote, these people, and the limitations that the government places on, quote, these people. This is the theme that John C. Calhoun stated whenever he tried to justify the existence of owning slaves. And this is also what's behind every aspect of every nation's welfare system. We are these people. These people who can't take care of themselves. These people who are the government's burden, who are the burden of the elitists, who say, you know, you're not smart enough to make your own choices. You're not smart enough to live in today's society. And the abuse of indigenous people may take some different avenues than the abuse of everybody else in the country. But it has the same foundational basis. And in reality, it's the same kind of abuse. And it's targeted towards everybody. And on the other end of that is abuse is, since you have been successful, those people have been successful, those people have been able to take care of themselves, those people, their decisions have led them to acquire resources that these people haven't got. It's our right, since these people are our burden, to take from those people their resources, their rights, their safety, their independence, and give it to these people. And that's what we're dealing with. That's one of the reasons that feminists hate anti-feminist and non-feminist women who are men's rights activists, because to them, women are these people and men are those people.
Right. And I mean, there's also kind of the whole thing with just, you know, not trusting these people to be able to take care of themselves. Like just saying, oh, you know, it's okay. It's somebody else's fault that you're struggling the way that you are. So, you know, it's just easier to put the blame on somebody else and to not take that responsibility for yourself. But, you know, that might feel good for some people temporarily, but ultimately, I think the best thing that anybody can do for their own mental health is to, you know, take charge of what you can do with your life. Stop listening to these people who are saying, you know, you're just a victim of circumstances. You're just a victim of men or of white people or of whatever boogeyman you want to put out there, the patriarchy, I guess. Stop listening to things like that. You have the power to do what you want to do in your own lives. And if you stop making excuses for like any of your failings, then I think that you'll find that you're actually going to be a lot happier ultimately, because you'll find that you can take action to make things happen in your life, to take charge in multiple different ways. And it feels so damn good when you actually take that charge, when you take control of your agency again. It's remarkable, and I don't think that anybody who has that kind of control over their lives would ever again be susceptible to the kind of thinking that these people like to promote.
Now, Prim, how can you talk like that after being so heinously victimized by the knock-up fairy? I mean...
I know.
All I have to say is, you know, like, just to reiterate that or to add to it, is, you know, like, I made my choices when I chose to have my children young, because you know, it was one thing to consider having a baby at 35. I didn't want to have a teenager at 50. So I wanted to have them while I was young. And you know, I made a choice to marry a man who was prepared to do that with me, and it didn't work out, and I owned my part of that, and I took responsibility for my choices, and I don't whine about it. In fact, I look back and I say, well, I would not have done anything differently, because if I had done things differently, these kids that I love would not exist. But Did I feel like there was, I mean, there were times when I felt trapped, you know, and that there was no way to get out of the situation, but I described it like you're in a maze, like a mouse or a rat, and outside the exit, there's a bunch of people with baseball bats waiting to kick your ass, and so I kicked a hole in the wall, and I got out, and that's what I did. So essentially, like, I've always essentially said, you know, the outcomes that I've experienced have been, at least in part, not always 100%, because that just doesn't happen, but at least in part due to my own choices. And so essentially that gave me a sense of empowerment, even when I felt like I was being treated unjustly, even when I felt like I was being held back or had unfair obstacles put in my path, right? I always looked and said, okay, you actually were part of this situation. You had agency throughout. You actually, in some way, chose to put yourself in this situation. And therefore, I felt empowered to resolve the issue, right? But what I see so much in feminist rhetoric is, you know, nothing women do, right? You can't tell a woman, just don't go to frat parties and drink your freaking brains out, right? Because that's victim blaming, and that's not okay. And it's not okay that women should have to adjust their behavior, right? And it's not okay that women should have to, change their lifestyles or anything like that in order to avoid being victimized. That's just unfair. That's horrible. Women should be allowed to do whatever they want and be 100% guaranteed that they will not be victimized. And if they are, it is everyone's fault, particularly the patriarchy. And so what they're doing is they're robbing women of a sense of feeling in charge of their own lives, right? They are literally saying, oh, there's nothing you could do. There's nothing you can ever do. You're going to be victimized because patriarchy. And it blows me away, because I've been in tough situations. I've been in horrible, horrible situations and figured my way out of them because I didn't panic. I didn't freeze. I didn't freaking lose my mind, right? I didn't become traumatized. I just figured out what to do and then did it.
Yes, you know, actually, I have a story that happened semi-recently to me that I was able to kind of explain exactly that kind of thing to somebody who was, I mean, completely unrelated to any of this. It was just somebody from my work. We're talking about getting me involved in the domestic violence training at the crisis center. There's different modules for training the people to go on the crisis line, and the training coordinator at my work is actually also quite heavily involved in CAFE, which is fantastic. So she said, you know, I know that you're doing a lot of research in the area of domestic violence, particularly men's domestic violence. So it would be really nice to get you on board for the training section of that, because I know that you wouldn't just focus on female victims of domestic violence. You would get in there and you would teach the volunteers about all kinds of domestic violence. And I said, yes, that would be amazing. And then one of my other coworkers was like, oh, you know what you should do for that module? You should show the consent is like tea video. And I'm like, no. And here's why not. And the example that I used was I talked about how my first physical intimacy experience with the person was one that I was not terribly comfortable with. He basically asked for a blowjob, and I said, you know, I'm not sure I feel ready for that. And he responded with saying, you know, you'll do fine. And sure, he might have been a little clueless. He might have said instead, you know, you don't have to if you're not ready. But ultimately, I was the one who decided to go along with it anyway, even though I wasn't fully comfortable. And you know what? Afterwards, I cried. I didn't feel good about doing that. But the important thing is that I learned I learned about my own personal boundaries, and I came out stronger from that as a result. I was able to reassert myself. I was able to say, you know, I'm not going to do this anymore. We ultimately wound up breaking up shortly after that. But had I been, I don't know, using the consent is like tea line of logic, right? It would have been a very different kind of experience. I would have been like, oh my gosh, I am totally a victim of this guy who pushed himself on me, instead of saying, no, this was an experience that I did. It was my bad, and now I know better about myself.
You probably wouldn't have broken up with him too.
Yeah, exactly.
You probably would have just kept doing it because that's what victims do.
Well, and of course, the Mary Koss School of rape definitions would have considered that to be a rape, even though you were an active participant in it. And I've made decisions. There's been a lot of things like that. Not all of them are sexual things. You know, I've taken responsibility for projects at work. I have taken responsibility when I was still going to church. I took responsibility for projects in my church because somebody really, really, really needed somebody to do it. And they made it very, very clear to me that I was their only hope. I was their Obi-Wan Kenobi. And if I didn't do it, they were just going to be in serious trouble. And I didn't want to do it. And I did it anyway. And it's the same kind of boundary pushing and boundary establishment issues, regardless of whether it is a sex act or a piece of responsibility at work that you're taking on, a project of responsibility at work, whether it's your neighbor asking you to come over and feed their dog every day while they're on vacation, even though, you know, maybe it's gonna, the timing is gonna coincide with when you should be leaving for work. You know, and it's just, there's always things in your life that are like this. And the worst thing you can do is teach any group of people that their boundaries are somebody else's responsibility and not theirs. Boundaries are a two-way responsibility. They're simply a two-way responsibility. And half of that responsibility is setting them and enforcing them, communicating them, making them clear, saying this is the stopping point, no further. And if you don't do your half, if you don't do your half, the other person is not responsible for their half. Nobody is responsible for answering a phone call you didn't make.
Right. And the thing that really chafes my carrot is, like, how in the hell is it supposed to be better that to say that I was quote unquote raped or the victim of sexual assault than to say my boyfriend was maybe a little bit of a dope and I wasn't fully aware of my own boundaries, and now I know them better. Why is the first thing supposedly more attractive to people?
Oh yeah, no, and on top of that, Prim, you should have been traumatized for life over that.
Exactly.
That should be following you around. You should actually. I think I saw a second front door on your house. And you don't fly much, do you?
No, not really, no.
Because you know, like, that would be traumatizing for you because of this horrible thing that happened to you that you participated in. And it's just like, honestly, there are things that I could have done as a kid, and this is one of the things that gets me about the Brett Kavanaugh case and all of this stuff, right? Okay, so I went to a house party. It was a house party at an apartment, or like it was a townhouse, where all the furniture was moved out, and it was essentially described as a house wrecking party, right? Nobody actually did any damage intentionally, but there were lots of people there. We were all drinking, right? And then the cops showed up, and everybody ran, and I ended up walking across this private golf course to get home with a few people, and the cops stopped, and, you know, they were driving across the greens, right? And they stopped and they said, what's going on? And I said, oh, I'm walking home. And they said, you realize this is private property? I said, I didn't realize that, but thank you for letting me know. I'll take the first exit. And but it was like, when I'm looking at something like that, and, you know, the people who were involved in that party and the shit that they were going to do, and then I I take the first exit off the golf course. It's the main freaking rich person street in my town at the time, right? And my vice principal, he was actually my my official disciplinarian in high school, Mr. Sadaway. He lived on that street, and my friends dared me to take a shit on his front lawn. And I thought about it, and I actually really wanted to do it. You know, and then I was like, you know, but if I get caught, that's going to be really, really, really unfortunate. The just like the weight of the consequences was just too much for me to pull down my pants at age 16 and take a shit on this man's lawn who had made my life a living hell for a year and a half. And so I didn't do it. There are people egging me on, and I didn't do it. And it's like, you know, honestly, sometimes if you just freaking have your own sense of here's what I'm willing to do and here's what I'm not willing to do, right? And I'm willing to talk politely with the cops and comply with what they say is appropriate and avoid trouble. And I'm also unwilling to take a shit on someone's front lawn and possibly get caught, because that would open a nightmare. So I just don't understand this idea that you should be able to make every choice. Every choice is morally justifiable. Every choice means that whatever the consequences are, if they're bad, they're not your fault. You know what? If I'd taken a dump on Mr. Sadaway's lawn and the porch light had come on and he'd come out and recognized me, I would have gone into the court and said, yeah, I did that, and I was a fucking retard.
That was a shitty story, Karen. Just saying.
It really was a shitty story. But like, I just going on like what teenagers do,
yeah.
Right? Like literally, I had people telling me like, do it, right? I'm sorry, but when you're 14, 15, 16, 17, and the shit that you do, I mean, like, honestly.
Well, yeah, and the thing is, teenagers do make bad decisions, a lot of them,
do.
and you can raise your teenagers to make better decisions, and
certainly,
you know, obviously, your parents
probably
instilled more think about it before you do it in you than many teenagers do. The thing is, the people who make the bad decisions because they didn't think about it before they did it, they are responsible. If you had decided to take a shit on your principal's front lawn, and you know,
I would have owned my shit.
You would have owned your shit. But the thing is, that's because you know that something that many young people, and even all feminists for the most part, fail at, and then that is you're responsible for it. Everything that you do, you're responsible for everything you do. That's a controversial idea. You're responsible for everything you do is a controversial idea. And even more controversial is the idea that if you punch a ball on a swiveling stick and it comes back around and hits you in the back of the head, that it's society's fault. That it's not society's fault, but your own fault. That you did that to yourself. That's a controversial idea. I did that when I was in high school. Not in literal terms, but I found out I was hanging out with criminals. I met these guys, right? I met these guys through a girl on my Bible quiz team. Oh. So I had no idea until I started hearing them talk about some of the stuff that they were selling, and then I discovered one of them was carrying a gun and all this other. That would have been the time to say, you know what? I don't really need to be a part of this crowd. That would have been the perfect time to say, I'm not coming back here. You know, and because I was a really straight-laced kid in a lot of ways. I didn't go to most of the parties that happened in my community. And that my community had some parties. The kids I went to high school with, there were 2 parties I went to. One of them, I was the instigator for that one. My family kind of hosted it. I got together with some of the other girls in my class, and we had a sort of celebration of the fact that we were seniors and we had a pool party. We rented the city pool, and in the evening, and we had chaperones and everything. So like, there's no alcohol, no drugs, no sex, just rock and roll. And we all figured out we were going to win state. Our football team was going to win state that year, and we were right. The other one, we had a party, a friend of mine had a party, a no alcohol party, to see if my classmates could have a good time without getting drunk. That's like, those were the 2 that I went to. All of the rest of the parties were the reason that she had that party, to see if my classmates could have a good time without getting drunk. The stuff that, you hear about in the news, Ohio kids getting plowed all the time, teenage drinking and all that, it's all real. And it's not all of the kids, but there are always parents that leave their kids unattended. There are always alcohol parties. There are always, ridiculously stupid, wild things going on. I knew what a beer bong looked like, even though I didn't go to any of those parties. I knew what a beer bong looked like when I was in junior high. Basically just a funnel and a hose, and all of that stuff. I didn't do any of that stuff, but I hung out with drug dealers because I was stupid at that age. And, you hang out with criminals. Criminals are more likely to commit a violent crime against you. And it was hanging out with that crowd and being the person that I am, being mouthy towards rivals of that crowd, that led to the one gang rape that I talk about occasionally. And that's, I'm not saying that what those guys did was my fault, but the fact that I was in that situation, that I was vulnerable to that, totally was. 100%. That was my fault. I could have avoided that if I hadn't been hanging out with those guys. Nobody that was a part of my social group did that to me when I was in high school. Nobody that I hung out with in high school did that to me. The only other person that's ever behaved in that way towards me was nuts. Not somebody, not a predictable situation. But that was a situation I could have avoided. That is consequences coming back to hit you. And in my opinion, feminists are really doing women a massive disservice when they cannot acknowledge that. Because if, somebody like me today had seen me then, the whole picture, the whole person, and then had a little talk with 17-year-old me and said, what you're getting yourself into, this is really dumb. Why the hell are you doing this? You know better. I might have avoided it. But there was nobody looking at the whole picture because, when I was 5 years old, I learned from an older person how to be a sneaky shit. And I was. I was a sneaky shit. And that stuff comes back. And it galls me. This is one of the reasons I am so anti-feminist. It galls me, like, not just a little bit, not just, this sticks in my craw. This is a deep gut galling about the way feminism handicaps women to stuff like that. You have the right and the responsibility to take charge of your experiences and be mindful of your surroundings and your situation and what potential consequences exist to your actions, and plan your life accordingly and take your actions accordingly. Men do that. Men learn to do that when they're young, because if they don't, and they face consequences and they bitch about it, people laugh at them for that. When women don't do it and women face consequences and they bitch about it, people get all up in arms on their behalf and tell everybody to shut the fuck up and not contradict them.
which
Yeah,
is just
and change all of
ridiculous.
society.
Because
Change all of society.
yeah, exactly. Because a lot of the most positive lessons I ultimately learned throughout my teenage years came from really bad decisions and things that were really unpleasant at the time. Like the one I explained earlier, mouthing off to another girl in the class who was kind of the big dog, and I learned not to be so much of a shit. And it sucked at the time because I lost a lot of my friends, but you know what? I learned not to be so much of an asshole. So that was a really significant thing for me. I actually came back and thanked the girl who bullied me several years out of high school, and she's like, you know, I'm really glad that something positive came out of that, because I don't like the way that all went down either. And that was a really positive experience that came from that. And to think that, you know, I could have just taken it on all on me and be like, oh, you know, oh, I'm such a victim of circumstances, and oh, now I suffer from anxiety like 98% of the other millennials. It's like, oh no, I have all of these conditions that are keeping me from doing anything with my life. It's just not an empowering message to take on.
No.
I think honestly, like one of the problems with you know, millennials and the younger generations is that they have not been they haven't been allowed unsupervised time together very much, and so they don't, like, I look at my, you know, and we had an accident with our dogs, right? So we got Kevin, who's like a freaking freak. And we have Borat, who's like just the most calm, easy to get along with dog, who's about a third of her size, right? And they play together. Kevin always wants to play. Borat sometimes gets tired. He lets her know. She doesn't take the hint frequently. But so they're playing on the love seat the other day. And in the middle of Kevin doing a somersault on top of Borat, because that's what she does when she's losing. Because he had her face, the whole side of her face. He had a good hold on it, right, of the loose skin on the side of her face, and so she decided she was going to somersault over top of him, and his back leg got caught in his choke chain, in her choke chain rather, and then because she somersaulted, it twisted, and so his back leg was twisted in this knotted choke chain above that heel joint, the largest joint. And he just starts screaming, right? And of course, Sam, my 16-year-old, and I, who were in the room, get up and immediately try to deal with the situation. And every time I try and loosen this choke chain from around this dog's leg, he just starts, and then he starts trying to bite me, and then Kevin starts trying to bite him, right? and it's just like, because he's attacking me, right? And that's not cool. Right. And then finally, and then Mike comes out from the office, and he, my guy, and he holds Borat, and we get enough slack in the chain that I can like get it off over that one joint. And it was just like, and then all of a sudden they're like, okay. And Borat comes and sits with me, and then Kevin comes and sniffs him for like 12 solid minutes. She's like, are you okay? 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 Right? And but I mean, when you look at them going at each other, right? Like, Kevin is like brutally trying to like use her height and weight advantage to like just squash him, right? And he's just using his smallness to like hide underneath her and grab her face and pull her head down. And they're just being absolutely, you know, ruthless with each other and pinning each other constantly. And then they had this one accident that really worried both of them, right? But we don't allow kids to interact like that. We don't allow kids to sort out their own shit, to do their own sort of shoving matches on the playground, their own shit talking with each other, right? We intervene immediately because we're always supervising them, right? And we're supervising them close in, right? And monitoring their behavior and policing their behavior, as opposed to standing back and only getting involved when somebody's leg gets caught in somebody else's choke chain. And then you're worried that, oh God, the big dog is going to freak out and go, oh my God, what's happening? Run away. Where? China, I don't know. Right? And then drag the little dog around the house, bashing his head into walls, right? Like that's the catastrophe. The catastrophe is not that they bite each other and pin each other and wrestle with each other and all of those things, right? The catastrophe is when something goes wrong, they have an accident, and they both feel horrible afterwards, right? That's the catastrophe. But we have essentially gone to the point where with kids, we want to avoid the catastrophe or the potential catastrophe or the potential hurt feelings of being pinned 3 times in a row, right? And not being able to sneak underneath him and bite the side of his face. We've looked at that and said, well, that's not okay. It's not okay for kids to behave this way. It's not okay for kids to figure out their own boundaries. It's not okay for kids to sometimes get hurt, not harmed, but hurt. It's not okay for that. And so essentially, I think that we have this whole issue with millennials and later generations just being so overprotected and so over-supervised that they don't know how to cope. And I think that's where a lot of this authoritarianism is coming into play in terms of, well, I can't beat you in the shoving match, or even shove back, get pinned, and earn your respect for being willing to shove back. So I'm going to tattle on you. An adult is going to come to intervene over our minor altercation, and we will never learn how to actually sort it out on our own. I think that's really, yeah.
Yeah, and this is one where modern feminism has picked up where second wave feminism left off. And the second wave feminism made some points in terms of sexual violence. Like, permission is permission. Appearance isn't permission. History isn't permission. Permission is permission. And that should go both ways, right? If my husband were to have a credit card and we were short on cash but had to buy something, and he gave it to me and said, we'll use this today, that's not permission for me to just go on a shopping spree every week with that credit card because I want to. And it's the same thing with if you've had sex with somebody, that doesn't mean that she can expect you to say yes the next time and the next time and the next time, or assume that yes is the answer and just climb on top of you. And that's not wrong when feminists say that. It's wrong when they presume that to be the attitude of all men. It's wrong when they assume that every argument that brings up sexual history is that argument. But it isn't wrong for them to say that that argument would be a wrong argument, that well, if you've done it before, that's permission forever. Or if you were skimpily dressed, that's permission or something. Those are good points. Along comes third wave feminism, and that nothing that a woman can do is her responsibility. Nothing that she's responsible for doing impacts the interaction. So if she reaches down a guy's pants and pulls his dick out, that's not permission for him to show her his dick. And he's now committing a sexual assault because he touched her with his dick that she reached out and grabbed. You know, that's modern feminism, and that's where they're headed, and it's just stupid. And it really is a continuation of, well, this generation was this protective, and that generation is that protective, and now the next generation is this much overprotective. Eventually it's going to snap back, and we're going to get a generation that's going to have to be less overprotective of their kids. The thing that I fear is we're also going to end up in a generation that's too collective in terms of how they deal with their kids. I have hope for my hometown. the town that I grew up in, because the last time I was there, I drove past the park I used to play in when I was a kid, and there were moms in their front yards in the houses facing the park. They were doing yard work. They weren't actually staring at the park, you know, but they were there. They were present. They were within reach, so the kids, if they needed something, you know, or if there was a accident or something and somebody starts screaming, you know, I fell off the monkey bars or whatever, there's a mom, you know, but there was not a single adult on the grounds of the park. The park is just one city block. It's you can see the whole thing from any point anywhere in the park. And there were no adults there. The kids were just playing, and they were playing sandlot football, tackle sandlot football, with no pads and no adults. And there were kids as young as, you know, early elementary school, playing with kids old enough that you could almost, I'd say they had to be at least junior high. Probably some of them were early high school. And that was great. I mean, and these were, you know, the high school kids are more gentle with the little kids than they are with each other. But you can, if you have your windows down, I don't have any air conditioning in my vehicle, you can hear when they hit. So they're not pulling any punches. So these are kids that are going to be all right. They're going to grow up, and they're going to be able to deal with life, not because they played sandlot football, but because they played together without having an adult hovering over them going, you can't do that. That's not okay. Don't do that. Keep your hands out of that. Don't touch that person that way. Don't talk that way to that person. They just played. And they used their imaginations, and they made their own peace with each other.
Yeah, no, and one of the things that struck me with my youngest, because I think he was walking home from the bus stop, so he was taking the bus, so he had to have been in junior high, probably grade 9, and he comes in the front door and he's all excited, right? He's all like, you know, super pumped, right? He's like, Mom, guess what? And I'm like, what? And he says, I totally got mugged. and I'm like, okay. And he says, yeah. These two guys, right? Big guys. They stopped me on my way home from the bus stop in broad daylight, of course, in our neighborhood, because that happens. And they were like, give us all your stuff. And then I talked my way out of it. And he's like, I had $20 and my bus pass in my wallet. The bus pass is worth like $70. And they didn't even look, because I was like, oh, what do you want? Like, open my backpack. And I was like, showed them my crumpled up homework and shit. And I was like, do you really want this? And then they were like, fuck off. And then they, like, you know, threw my backpack on the ground and pushed me down and walked away. And I was like, totally fucking handled that, Mom.
Nice.
And I'm like, oh, son, I'm proud of you.
Yep. He used his brain to get out of it. That was, you know, that's one where a lot of parents of millennials, a lot of Gen X parents would just freak out. Oh my God, you got mugged. We gotta go to the police station. Are you okay? Are you bleeding? Did you get your lip split? You know, blah, 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 blah. This is my brother and I and a friend of ours. I've talked about this before on the show. We went, this is a Halloween story, so it's perfect for October. We went trick-or-treating without parents one time. And the one time we went trick-or-treating without parents, I was 11 years old. Our buddy was 10 years old, and my brother was 9. We go trick-or-treating all over the neighborhood. And this was, you know, this was back during the 80s. And by the time I was 11, it was the 80s. And so it was, you weren't too worried about what people were doing to the candy at that point in time. There wasn't, like, there were urban myths, but nobody believed them. And I don't think I've ever heard of a news story where there is a real example of somebody actually doing things to the candy. But now you take your kids' candy to get x-rayed and everything after they go trick-or-treating because of the urban myths, right? But we're going along, and we hear from somebody else that's trick-or-treating without parents that a particular group of guys, and I can't remember, they had a name for their little, quote, gang, end quote. They were just a group of assholes, right? But they were hovering in the part of the neighborhood where one of the street lamps wasn't working properly, and they were mugging kids for their candy. And we were in a position now where we had to go through one of those two areas in order to, you know, like, we could go whichever direction we went, we were going to have to deal with it. We could go through the one where we were going to have to deal with it sooner, or we could go through the one where we were going to have to deal with it later. And my brother and our friend, they talked about it, and they made a plan. They're like, you know, if we avoid this, they're going to come and get us later. We're not going to get out of this. We can only put it off, right? So we made our little plan. This is what we're going to do. They were going to protect me because I was the girl. And I will never forget that. Here we were. I was the oldest one in the group, right? I'm the one that's supposed to be responsible, and the boys are already talking about how they're going to protect me. So that was my 9-year-old little brother is going to protect me, and he was actually bigger than me too. So in any case, we go along, right? We're walking forward, and we get past the point where we thought they were going to hit us, and we're like, oh, well, they weren't here after all. It was all, you know, baloney. So we're walking along past there, and they come running out from behind the bushes. And the thing I remember out of it, you know, I had wrapped my my candy. We were using pillowcases, so I had wrapped my pillowcase with my candy in it around my wrist. We had a shitload of candy, and it was heavy, and I was going to use it as a bludgeon. You know, I was going to hit him in the head with it. It was probably like 10 pounds of candy, so I was going to hit some kid in the head with a 10-pound weight. It's probably a good thing I didn't. Anyway, they grabbed it, and it tightened around my wrist, and I couldn't let go. So so he drags me down the sidewalk, kicking and screaming, you know, what do you think you're doing? I'm going to get you. You're going to be in really big trouble. You can't believe how much trouble you're going to be in, you know, and I can't let go of this candy. So he finally stops because, you know, I might not be very big, but I'm not weightless either. And he takes the candy and he's yanking it back and forth and yelling at me, let go. And I won't. And so my brother, I look back and there he is, and he beats the hell of a guy that was up against him, and our buddy is fighting off a guy. So I think I'm on my own. I start maneuvering myself around him, and I kick my opponent in the knees because it's the only thing I can reach from the ground. And I figure that would stop him. And I hear this whap, 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 whap. You know, my brother comes along, and his fist comes all the way down by my nose and launches into this guy's nose and just broke it. And like for a second, there's nothing. Like there's this pause where there's no action, no nothing, no voices, no hitting, no nothing. Everything stops. And then it just exploded. Like blood everywhere. And, you know, the guy's screaming, you broke my nose! You broke my nose! And he goes running off, and the other guys had all gone running off and everything. The end of the situation, though, I think they got two of the guys' candy. They got both of the guys' candy. They didn't get mine, so we split my candy. But before all of that, you know, this little old lady that lived at the other end of that street, we continued down the street, you know. We get to her house, and she just fussed over us. Oh, my goodness, what happened to you guys? Are you okay? You know, and everything. The first thing out of my brother's mouth, it's all right, it's not my blood. And it was like he was coated in it, like it head to toe, man. He had blood on all of his clothing, his shoes, his shirt, his pants, you know, like everything. And she just calmed right down. Oh, it's not your blood. Okay. You know, like somebody out there bled that much, right?
Right.
So can you tell me what happened? You know, and she invites us in, and this is a sweet old lady in the neighborhood. She's like everybody's grandma. We used to bring her stuff and sit and listen to her stories and everything. And so she called our parents for us, and my dad shows up to pick us up. She didn't let us walk. There was like 2 blocks back to our house. And my dad gets there, and there we are, you know, sitting at this little old lady's table eating cookies and looking like cute little kids covered in blood. Oh my God, what happened to you? And my brother, same thing. It's okay, it's not my blood. Dad's like, okay, good. You know, instantly, oh, it's all right, it's not my blood. He takes us home and everything. But that's the way things were back then, you know. And of course the rest of the story is not so nice. My mom went to confront the mother of the boy whose nose my brother broke about the cost of getting his pants cleaned and everything. And she calls her son out. First, she's like, "How your son is a bully. He broke my son's nose. My son is only 14 years old. He's in high school. He's not even an adult." My mom's like, "My son's 9." So she calls her son out. "You got beat up by a 9-year-old? Not you were picking on a 9-year-old. Not you were mugging other kids for their candy. How dare you? You got beat up by a 9-year-old? What is wrong with you?" Right? But yeah, it's okay. It's not my blood. That was it. I'm not dying. That was it. When I put my foot in hot coals and got 3rd-degree burns, once it was established that this was not going to kill me, every adult in my life, from my parents to the neighbors to my teachers to the doctor to my aunts and uncles to the people at my church. "Well, you won't do that again, will you?"
What the fuck were you thinking?
No, just, "Well, you won't do that again, will you?" That's what Gen X grew up with. That's what we should be doing with our kids. That is what feminism denies women. You don't learn if you can't take responsibility for your bad choices. We skipped a super chat, so I'm going to read it off real quick. Actually, we didn't skip it. We just missed it, and there's a second one now, too. So we have Frenchinator2 gave us US $5 and followed up on his super chat about the Facebook conversation with "I'm in America. The guy was using 'you are either with me or against me' manipulation tactic." I hate that tactic. He did it on Columbus Day. Same shit. And I hate that too. The two topics don't really have anything to do with each other. If you disagree on indigenous people, it doesn't make you pro-circumcision. I'm sorry. But in any case, Albert Nada gave us $5 Canadian and said, "Trevor Noah raped Brian. I tried to stop it, but Stephen Colbert and Jimmy Kimmel were raping me at the time." Well, there you go. We have to believe that because you can't disbelieve rape accusers. So
yeah, no.
I thought that was just women.
Well, there is that.
Oh wait,
Are we gendering our commenter? Because we can't assume.
Oh yeah, no, he could be. Hey, here's something interesting. Does anybody remember Charles Clymer?
Mm-hmm.
You remember him? He was the guy who wrote the blog post that was like reposted by BuzzFeed that said that a man was something like 7 times more likely to be struck by a comet than to be falsely accused of rape.
Oh my God.
Yeah, that guy. Okay. So apparently he's now well, he got excommunicated from feminism because he was apparently a bully and a misogynist. But he is back now, according to Feminist Current, which is run by a woman named I think it's Megan Murphy, who's she's a TERF, right? She was just on Benjamin Boyce's channel. They did a chat together a while ago, which was interesting. She's at least honest in her beliefs that she is indeed a TERF. But it was just this year, it was posted a video of him in lipstick and eye makeup, claiming that he's now a transgender woman.
Oh, for Pete's sake.
And yeah, so that was kind of interesting. But yeah, he was the one who said essentially that men are more likely to be struck by lightning, hit by a comet, and all kinds of other stuff than they were to be falsely accused of sexual assault.
Well, he needs to look at the statistics that are essentially raw, just made available by Title9forall.com, which
you know what he did?
Which is where the lawsuits against universities that failed to provide adequate due process consideration to falsely accused male students on campus.
What he did was he calculated from the 2 to 8% of rape accusations are false statistic, how many per year were false, you know, comparing it against the estimated report rate for rape and the prevalence rates from, you know, crime statistics. Okay, so he figured out that number. Then he decided that he was going to say, okay, men between age 15 and 49 have sex an average of 99 times per year. And here is their risk of being accused of sexual assault per sexual encounter for the average guy. And then he compared it against the lifetime statistics of all these other things. And what he presented it as a lifetime statistic. But at the same time, I'm looking at it and I'm going, you don't even need to know the woman.
No.
You don't need to have ever met a woman to be falsely accused of sexual assault.
There's the Facebook accuser. You know what I mean? There's plenty of women that have been in trouble for accusing guys that they didn't even have sex with. So that whole thing, that throws that whole thing out the window. Yeah.
So, and I'm just like, okay, so this is like an egregious abuse of statistics, but he was drummed out of feminism because he was apparently emotionally manipulative, bullying, and dismissive towards women. And one of the abusive comments that these feminists brought up in this write-up as to why he was excommunicated was he essentially told a woman, you don't get to tell me to not talk. Your vagina doesn't give you special knowledge any more than my penis does.
Ooh.
And so he's completely fucking out to lunch, apparently, but at the same time, I'm like, how is that abusive?
He failed to worship at the altar of the holy vag. Oh my God, that poor guy. He's toast now. You know,
he definitely is.
That's the end. He's done.
Yeah.
He'll never work in this town again. But that's why he had to become trans.
Yeah, well, you know what though?
What?
That's it. That's the end. I have to go.
Okay. Well, I think we're probably gonna be done here because we're gonna get into other territory if I say the rest of my thoughts on this particular story. Because I can bring it back around to Raelwyn Connell, one-time Robert Connell, and her toxic masculinity narrative, and how feminists have basically made an individual who was not comfortable with masculinity, who had an aversion to masculinity, the spokesperson for what defines masculinity.
This Raelwyn Connell transitioned unexpectedly at like age 56 or something like that.
Yeah. Well, if you spend your whole life talking about how masculinity is toxic, you might have an incentive to get away from it. But, you know, and it doesn't mean that being trans in any way invalidates people's experiences or their thoughts or feelings or anything like that. It just means that that particular individual may not be the best person to define that particular topic for all of an entire biological sex.
Well, if you're forced to conform to masculinity to age 50 whatever, and it's not the right fit for you, and it doesn't suit your personality or your gender identity,
you'd view it as a prison.
Yeah,
you'd view it as and your writing about it would be from that perspective. So with that, I'm going to point out feminists treat accountability and agency the same way. They do not like being they have an aversion to these things, and they are stuck in a world where you can't avoid all of the consequences of your actions. And so in the course of accusing everyone else in the world of telling sexual assault victims that our experiences don't matter, they do exactly that. They tell us our experiences don't matter. They tell us our actions don't matter. They tell all women that we are helpless, meaningless, and useless. And that is supposed to be empowering. And it's not.
And on that note...
I'm
going to say good night. and leave the discussion to you two ladies. Okay, I use that term loosely.
Yeah.
You two whammons. You two internalized misogynist, rape apologist, horrible, really awful, no good people.
Very bad people, yes.
And, yeah, and I'm going to go because I have something essentially knocking at the door right now. So,
all right. Well, good night, Karen. I will give Prim one chance for a last statement on this.
I think we've basically talked it out. I think basically the whole thing where, you know, victimization is the cool thing to do, yo. It's not true. It's not true. Agency feels much better. Trust me on this one. Yeah, that's basically it. I think we've otherwise said all we have to say on the matter.
All right. Everybody like, share, and, you know, shove it in everybody's face. And thank you guys for being on with me. Thank you all for listening. And thanks to everybody who was a part of making HBR Talk happen. Good night, all.